When you go to purchase a Tissot PRX, you're going to be met with a deceptively difficult decision to make. Of course, you'll have to decide on a dial color or a strap choice, and decide if you want the quartz version of the PRX or if you want to opt for the Powermatic 80 automatic movement. But I think for most people, these are the easier decisions to make when it comes to picking out your PRX. The more difficult decision for myself, and I think most people who are considering the PRX, is case diameter, which just refers to the width of the case, not including the crown. As of right now, you have two options when picking out your PRX. You can opt for the slightly smaller 35mm case, or the slightly larger 40mm case. Now for some, this decision might be a no-brainer. If you have really large wrists, you're gonna go for the 40mm. And if you have really small wrists or just prefer smaller watches, you're gonna go with the 35. But for those like myself who have what I would consider to be a medium-sized wrist, this is actually a really difficult decision to make. I think most of us would prefer a 37 or a 38mm case, but it just doesn't exist yet for the PRX. Now, if I had to bet on it, I would guess that Tissot will release either a 37 or 38mm PRX sometime in the future, just given how much demand there is at this size. But unfortunately right now, we do have to make a decision between 35 and 40mm. So I want to talk you through my thought process when making this decision and how I landed on the 40mm case for myself. So welcome back to WristFind. Quick wrist check before we get started. Today I'm wearing the vintage Seiko 5, and yes, this does have an aftermarket dial, so sue me. Let me know down in the comments what you're wearing. So this case size decision is something I had gone back and forth on in my brain for months before I had even seriously considered getting this watch. And my fiance ended up getting this for me as an engagement gift while we were away on a trip. And this turned out to be super helpful for making this decision because I actually got to try on the 35 and the 40mm in store. This is the first time I had ever gone to see or try on a watch in person before purchasing it. And I do highly recommend it, especially if you're on the fence about a size or a color. So here's the thing that I didn't really realize about the PRX until I really tried it on in person and tried the two different size variations. The thing that I think is really hard to see in pictures and videos is just how much this bezel curves inward. The full case itself does sit at right about 40mm in width, but the actual bezel and dial width is much smaller than I expected. So even though the entire case itself does sit a little bit larger, the fact that the bezel and the dial is sort of angled inwards makes the whole watch feel a little bit more appropriately sized. You can see that even though the case is pretty large and does have a lot of this extra material, the dial actually does look like the right size on my wrist. And this is the exact same reason why the 35mm felt way too small on me. Even though the 35mm case wasn't drastically different than this Seiko that I'm holding here, it just looked so much smaller on my wrist because of that inward angle of the bezel and the smaller dial. And there's nothing inherently wrong with a smaller watch. As you can see, the Casio F91W is a really small watch, but still fits my wrist pretty nicely. But because the PRX, at least to me, is such an interesting statement piece and has such a cool dial, to me the 35mm just didn't do it justice. My favorite part of the automatic PRX is just that textured waffle dial. And I just think it looked a little bit minimized and didn't pop quite as much on that smaller case. So it is a funny watch, with the case having all this extra material and wearing slightly larger, yet the dial feeling appropriately sized. And with the 35mm, it felt like the case was a decent size, but the dial just felt way too small. Now, of course, like most things in watch collecting, this is going to come down to personal preference. But my recommendation after trying on a ton of these in store and flipping back and forth between the 35 and the 40 is that unless you have really small wrists, or you just have a preference for the smaller case and the proportions of the 35mm, I would say that the majority of people with medium to larger size wrists are going to be more happy with the bigger 40mm PRX. There's just more to look at, and I think it lets you appreciate the dial a little bit more. Now that being said, if I was to buy a second PRX, I might seriously consider the 35. It does look really good, and it's a little bit more low-key than the 40mm, but I think if you're only going to have one PRX, in most cases I would opt for the larger 40mm. But there's no right or wrong way to do this, and at the end of the day, you shouldn't listen to me or anyone else who's advising you on which watch to get. Get the one that you like and that your gut is telling you to get, regardless of what other people are saying. That being said, if you are in the market for a PRX and you're not going to go in person to try these on at a store, I would highly recommend getting your PRX from Amazon. You're still buying from Tissot, so you get all the same warranties and customer service that you would get if you were buying it off their website, but you also get the added benefit of super easy and convenient Amazon returns if you decide that it's not the right size for you. I'll leave some Amazon links down below if you want to go check out those listings, but I think it's a really smart way to do it if you're not going to go in person. So let me know down in the comments what you think. Do you prefer the 35? Do you prefer the 40? Or would you rather have something in the middle at 37 or 38? Again, my prediction is that someday we will have a more medium-sized option, but for right now, you're forced to make this decision. But honestly, you can't go wrong either way, and I can almost guarantee that you're gonna love your PRX regardless of the size that you get. If you wanna see a full unboxing of this watch and the experience that you get when you open this thing up for the first time, watch this video right here. Otherwise, make sure to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.